Hello, and welcome back to The Critique. Today, we're breaking down a transcript of a reaction video that's analyzing a documentary on the Hasidic Jewish enclave of Kiryas Joel.
It really dives into some contentious themes, things like welfare, cultural homogeneity, media narratives, so yeah.
A lot to unpack. Let's get straight to work.
Let's do it.
Okay, so a key theme that just runs through this whole thing is a really passionate defense of the community. But the primary way that defense is built is a heavy reliance on what you could call aggressive whataboutism.
Right.
The material is constantly trying to validate Kiryas Joel by comparing them to other groups, specifically Somali immigrants in Minnesota.
Yeah, that comes up a lot. And while you can feel the passion, you have to ask yourself if that comparative strategy actually works. I mean, to me, the argument ends up suffering from a lack of internal confidence.
How so?
Well, by constantly deflecting to Somalis committing fraud or, Mexicans doing the hard labor, the narrator sort of inadvertently suggests that the Hasidic community's lifestyle can't really be defended on its own merits.
It feels defensive, not explanatory.
Exactly. It's like a courtroom defense where the lawyer just points at someone else in the gallery and says, "But what about him?" instead of actually proving his client's innocence. It muddies the waters instead of clearing them.
So the strategic pivot, what's the improvement?
I think you have to decouple the analysis of Kiryas Joel from all these external grievances about other groups, just entirely.
Let it stand on its own.
Yes, the argument for the community safety, their family structure, all of that, it should stand independently of what's happening in Minnesota or Dearborn. If the data for Kiryas Joel is as robust as the text suggests it is, it doesn't need a villain to shine.
That's a good point. The villain should be the misunderstanding of the data, not another group of people.
Exactly.
Okay, let's get concrete. The text has lines like, "It's easy to crap on Somalis, but are you brave enough to call out the Jews?" Except the Jews aren't doing the same. It's combative, but it's not very informative.
Right. It frames it as a fight.
So a stronger version would just focus on the internal data. You could say something like, while high welfare usage typically correlates with crime in many socioeconomic models, this specific community defies that trend due to, intense cultural cohesion.
And you see the difference there, right? One is a deflection that just invites an argument about a totally different topic.
Mm-hmm.
The other is an analysis of an anomaly. It keeps the listener focused.
Right. And to fix that part about the fraud statistics, I'd say remove the comparison entirely. That line about Somalis committing $18 billion in fraud?
Yeah, get rid of it.
Get rid of it. And replace it with a deep dive into the specific mechanics of the legal welfare usage in Kiryas Joel. The narrator mentions tax credits in Section 8. Use that space to show how the system is used legally.
Explain the paperwork, the income brackets.
About how the system works.
That makes sense. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about the tone, the narrator's voice. This is fascinating because the commentary just oscillates wildly between serious political philosophy.
Oh yeah, radical capitalism, the welfare state.
And then it crashes right into this very online internet slang and meme culture.
It really does. I mean, you jump from federal poverty lines to phrases like Jew tunnels, leftoids, and based in a few sentences. It's whiplash.
And is that connection between the gravity of the subject and the vocabulary, is it really established? I'd argue it's not. The weakness is that total inconsistency just completely undermines the sociological analysis.
It really does.
Using terms like leftoid, based, diabolical, it trivializes the very legitimate points being made about poverty, family structures, or anti-Semitism.
It alienates anyone who's looking for a serious critique. It kind of reduces the whole thing to a caricature.
It signals to the listener that this is just content, not this is journalism. And that directly contradicts the narrator's own claim that he's doing a better job than mainstream journalism. You can't claim to be better than the New York Times while using 4chan vocabulary.
So what I like about this critique is that it's asking the writer to commit. Just pick a lane. If the goal is this intersection of theology and economics, then the language should reflect that. It should be more journalistic.
Precisely. You can still be entertaining without descending into meme speak that's just going to date the material and, frankly, lowers its IQ.
Let's offer some specific alternatives then. So the text uses dropped the new when discussing the statistic about families with 17 or 18 kids.
Yeah, very sensationalist.
It is. A better alternative would be to say it revealed a statistically significant demographic outlier. It keeps the impact, but it respects the data. It treats the audience like adults.
That's a great example. I also noticed it says Zionism is not based, or homogeneous communities are actually based.
Right. And based is a thought-terminating cliche here. I mean, what does it actually mean to a new listener?
Nothing. It means nothing. Instead of based, use precise language. Say socially cohesive or culturally unified or internally resilient. Those words actually explain why it might work. Based is just a stamp of approval.
And that Jew tunnel reference that's used as a transition, it immediately frames the narrator as a meme poster.
Right out of the gate.
Yeah. Instead, you could frame the narrator's entry as coming from a perspective of deep skepticism regarding media narrative. It sets a tone of investigation, not mock.
Building on that, let's shift to the ideological core of the piece. The narrator says he's a radical capitalist who hates socialism. Yet he ends up defending a community where, 60 to 90% of residents are on government assistance?
Right, and he's clearly grappling with that contradiction. He literally says, I'm anti-socialist, but defending Tyler and defending them, he's wrestling with it in real time.
He is. But is there a risk that by just observing the paradox, you're not resolving it? The weakness here is that the text acknowledges the contradiction, but it never fully resolves the cognitive dissonance.
It leaves you confused.
It leaves the listener totally confused about his actual stance on, say, state-sponsored religious study. If you're a radical capitalist, this community should be your ideological opponent, right? They're living off the state, but he defends them.
So it feels like he's giving them a pass just because he likes them, not because it actually fits his worldview.
Exactly. There's no synthesis of the tension.
So the improvement is to synthesize that paradox into a coherent thesis. The writer needs to actually explore why he gives this specific community a pass. Is it the lack of violence, the family value? It has to be more than just a gut feeling.
Right. So let's give some concrete ways to fix this. First, you have to explicitly articulate the tension. Don't just stumble over it.
Acknowledge it head on.
Yes, write a section that literally says, there is a profound conflict between my free market principles and my admiration for this community's stability. Acknowledge that the listener is probably confused and then walk them through it.
I like that. So what about the economic justification? How does a capitalist actually justify this?
Well, you could develop a trade-off theory section. The text mentions this is the safest place I have ever filmed.
Okay.
So you can argue that the low cost of policing, the lack of incarceration costs, the absence of violent crime, that's the economic offset for the high welfare burden.
So the state pays for groceries but saves on jails.
You got it. That resolves the capitalist paradox by framing it as a net zero or maybe even a net positive transaction for the taxpayer. It changes the whole conversation from freeloading to resource allocation.
That's fascinating. And the text does touch on the rich Jews in Manhattan paying taxes. That's another avenue.
Absolutely. Address that taxpayer investment argument head on. Analyze whether this ethnic pooling of resources validates the local welfare use. You could argue that the community functions as a macroorganism where the wealthy members subsidize the studious members, largely through the tax system.
So it's less of a socialist handout and more of a community redistribution mediated by the state.
Precisely, which might sit a little better with the narrator's libertarian leanings.
Okay, so that brings us to the actual numbers being used to support all of this. He throws out stats so fast.
It's like a blizzard of numbers meant to overwhelm you rather than enlighten you.
Yes, and I wonder, have we considered the rigor of these citations? The text says things like $13,000 per year income and median age is 15, but it treats them as these self-explanatory facts.
Right. But the listener needs the how and the why behind those numbers. The weakness is that the narrator reacts to the number, but he doesn't explain the policy that creates the number.
A median age of 15 is shocking. Explain what that does to a tax base. An income of $13,000 is poverty, so how do they survive on it?
Exactly. The improvement is to just pause the reaction and explain the mechanics of the stats. Don't just say the number, explain the equation behind it.
Yeah, for example, the text mentions the $13,000 income and then says it comes way closer to $35,000 when adjusted. But how? The listener's just left doing mental gymnastics.
So this is where you can really improve it. When you mention that $13,000 income, explain the per capita adjustment for adults versus children. Show the math. Don't just say it works out, yeah?
Say, if a household makes $50,000 but has 10 people, the per capita is $5,000. But if you isolate the two adults, their functional buying power is different. Walk the listener through the denominator of that fraction.
Explain that poverty guidelines are based on household size, so a huge family looks poorer on paper than they might feel.
because of economies of scale.
Hand-me-downs, shared rooms, bulk food, all of that.
And what about the private school argument? The text mentions it, but it feels a little anecdotal.
It needs to be bolstered. So with the 99% private school versus public school tax drain argument, you have to elaborate on the specific savings to the state. Don't just say that is $36,000 of your tax money.
Right. Break down the cost benefit. A concrete addition would be something like, the local public school district does not have to build infrastructure for 20,000 children. That's hundreds of millions of dollars in capital expenditure saved by the state. See? That turns a throwaway line into a formidable economic argument.
It shifts it from they don't pay school taxes to they don't use school services.
Which is a very different thing. And finally, that whole tax credit confusion. The text argues about whether credits cap after 3 kids.
And it becomes a he said, she said thing. The narrator says, I think, or I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, that's not good enough. You have to be definitive. The narrator should just look up the actual IRS code for the child tax credit and clarify it. The audience doesn't want to guess. They want value.
Providing the definitive answer, the child tax credit does not cap at 3 children, though phase-out thresholds apply, that adds a huge layer of authority that's just missing right now.
It stops being a reaction and starts being an educational resource. It seems the whole theme here is moving from just reacting to actually reporting. The raw material's there, the passion's there.
But the discipline to explain the mechanisms is what's lacking.
Exactly.
Okay, so to recap our critique for the listener, the way forward really involves 4 key shifts. First, strip away all the whataboutism about Somalis and other groups. Let Kiryas Joel stand or fall on its own data.
Second, elevate the language. Move from that internet slang to a more sociological analysis to match the seriousness of the topic.
Third, actively reconcile that capitalist welfare paradox. Don't just observe it, build a thesis on the trade-offs.
And finally, contextualize your stats with policy explanations and clear, simple math.
By doing that, you transform this from what feels like a fan defense into a cultural critique that even skeptics would have to respect. It changes the audience from people who already agree with you to people who want to learn something.
Well said.
We want to thank the listener for submitting this. It's a fascinating transcript, a really rich vein of material that just needs a little refining to truly shine. We invite you to implement these changes and submit the revised script for a follow-up. We'd love to see how this evolves.
Absolutely. I'm really curious to see if that trade-off theory holds up when the numbers are all fleshed out.
Until next time, keep refining your work.